Walking into my bedroom, I caught my dad holding hands with my wife. Then they asked me to stay married and pretend nothing happened. Okay, prepare yourself. This isn't just a story. It's the kind of gut-wrenching, jaw-dropping betrayal that shatters your entire world and leaves you wondering if you ever truly knew anyone. And the worst part? It involves the last two people I ever would have suspected, my own wife and my dad. I remember it vividly. I got off work early that day because the whole system had crashed, and they told us we were done for the rest of the day. A rare treat. I felt unusually happy, swinging by our favorite Thai place to grab takeout, planning to surprise my wife with lunch. We'd been married 2 years, and yeah, things weren't always sunshine and rainbows, but I thought we were solid. I really did. I had no reason to think otherwise. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, this cold dread washed over me. Something felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. My dad's car was parked a few houses down. I knew it was his, spotless and gleaming. He'd just had it detailed. My first thought was maybe he'd just dropped something off, but the engine was off, silent. No sign of him anywhere. When I walked into the house, it was just too quiet. The TV was on, barely a whisper. My wife wasn't in the living room. Then I saw them. 2 coffee mugs on the table, both half full. I didn't call out her name. I don't know why. I think my gut already knew. It screamed at me. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a pound against my chest, and then I heard it. Muffled voices from our bedroom. Her voice and my dad's. My blood ran cold. I froze there in the hallway, my mind racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were watching a movie, talking about something serious. But I couldn't stop myself. I pushed the door open, just a crack, and there they were. They weren't doing it. Not in the way you might imagine, but it was still intimate. Too intimate. They were sitting close on the bed, facing each other, hands intertwined, foreheads touching, like some tender, slow-motion embrace. They didn't even flinch when the door creaked. It was like they knew I'd come home early. My wife looked up first. Her face held no guilt, no fear, just this weird, unsettling calm. Then my dad looked at me, as if I'd just interrupted something inconvenient, but not entirely unexpected. They didn't scramble. They didn't explain. Instead, my dad slowly stood up and said, with a terrifying calm, "We need to sit down." I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't. I just followed them to the dining room. Like a puppet, my takeout bag and briefcase still in my hands. My wife started. She said what I walked in on wasn't what it looked like, but that she owed me honesty. Honesty. She admitted that she and my dad had known each other long before I ever met her. Friends, she said. Close friends. Too close. They had a complicated past and never really got closure. I finally found my voice, but it cracked. "Are you having an affair?" My dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's more than that." He said they had an emotional connection that never went away. And over time, they realized they were still in love. I felt like I was trapped in a bad movie, waiting for someone to yell prank or cut. But then my wife added, with a straight face, that they didn't want to hurt me. That was the worst part. They said it so sincerely, as if that mattered. My dad, the architect of my shattered world, then suggested this didn't have to turn into a disaster. He said we were all adults and could find a mature solution. I asked what kind of solution he was talking about. He proposed we stay legally married, but just live separate lives. No messy divorce, no family feud. Just peace. He even framed it like a win for everyone. I'd be free to date. She'd move out eventually, and we could split things slowly, privately, without embarrassment. No scandal, no drama, just a quiet transition. I asked them if they'd lost their minds. That's when my wife had the absolute nerve to reach for my hand, telling me she still cared for me deeply. Just not in that way anymore. She didn't want to lose me completely, she said, that I meant too much. She even suggested we could redefine our relationship because it didn't have to be black and white. I just stood up and walked out. I didn't even grab my keys. I walked for hours, just kept putting one foot in front of the other, until I ended up in a park near my old office. I sat on a bench, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. How long had this been going on? Had it ever stopped? Had I ever been anything more than a placeholder? A warm-up act for the real show? That night, I didn't go home. I crashed at my friend Lucas's place and just spilled everything. He thought I was lying at first. Then he just stared at me, his jaw on the floor, asking what I was going to do. I told him I had no idea. I couldn't process any of it. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. In the quiet darkness, it all started to make horrifying sense. The weird tension between my wife and my dad. The way she'd sometimes light up when he walked into a room, more than what felt appropriate. The family jokes about how alike they were. How my dad was always around, helping her fix something, even though I was perfectly capable. How my wife never minded when he stayed late. Maybe I had been a fool. Or maybe I had just trusted the absolute wrong people. By the third night, a cold, hard resolve started to set in. I called a lawyer. Whatever fantasy they thought they had, whatever peace they wanted to preserve, they were about to learn what real consequences looked like. Update 1 asterisk I ignored every call, every text, for an entire week. I stayed with Lucas the whole time. He was amazing, just letting me exist, not asking questions unless I felt like talking, which was almost never. Most days, I just sat on his back porch, staring at his overgrown yard, wondering how my life had turned into some sick, twisted parody. I went to work like a zombie. On the 8th day, I finally responded. I told them I'd come by to get some of my things, and I didn't want a conversation. I just wanted space. That seemed to trigger a full-blown panic. My phone wouldn't stop blowing up. My wife sent this long message, rambling about how hurt she was that I hadn't let her explain. She said she understood my anger, but insisted that what they were offering was the most compassionate option for everyone. Compassionate. That word rattled around in my head for hours. I couldn't figure out what kind of person used that word to describe betraying their husband with his own father. When I finally did go back, I brought Lucas with me. I didn't trust myself to be alone in that house, especially not with them. My dad had a way of making me feel small, even when I wasn't doing anything wrong. And my wife, well, she had her own talent for making betrayal sound like a misunderstanding. The moment I walked through that door, it was like stepping onto a stage set. My wife had cleaned the place top to bottom. She'd even baked cookies, like it was some sitcom apology. My dad was sitting in the armchair, looking annoyingly casual, like he was hosting Sunday dinner instead of the total implosion of my life. My wife asked if we could talk. I told her I wasn't there for a chat. I just needed documents and a few essentials. But of course, they couldn't help themselves. My dad stood up and launched into this whole speech about how he hadn't planned for things to happen this way. He said he didn't expect to fall for her again, that it was complicated and painful for him, too. He still wanted me in his life, he claimed, and hoped I'd consider their proposal. Their proposal, like this was some merger between business partners instead of a knife in my back. My wife chimed in, talking about how this arrangement didn't have to change our legal status right away, that we could avoid expensive lawyers and public messes if we just stayed civil and respected each other's boundaries. She said we'd be living our truth, and that was something to be proud of. Lucas, bless his heart, actually snorted. He didn't even try to hide it. I didn't say much. I just walked past them, grabbed the folder I needed from the office, and packed a small duffel bag. My wife followed me from room to room, trying to explain. She said, yes, it was wrong, but feelings aren't always convenient. She said they didn't want to lose me, that she still cared. I turned to her, my voice low and steady. If you cared about me, I said, you wouldn't have made me the last to know. You could have walked away, filed for divorce, ended things clean. But instead, you chose to lie every single day. You chose my father, and you still expected me to sit down and break bread with you both, like this was just some misunderstanding. She cried when I said that. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet, helpless tears. And I didn't feel a single drop of sympathy. Before I left, I looked at both of them. Whatever fantasy you've built together, I said, I want no part of it. You deserve each other. But you don't deserve me. And then I walked out. Later that night, Lucas and I went to a bar. I needed something stronger than coffee, and a place more crowded than his living room. As we sat there, the words finally came out. I was going to file for divorce. Lucas nodded. That's the right move, he said. Then he asked if I'd tell the rest of the family. That question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't even thought about my mom, my siblings, my cousins. None of them knew yet. And when they found out, I didn't even know whose side they'd take. I told him I wasn't ready for that yet. I just needed to figure out how to survive the next few days without completely falling apart. By the time we got back to his place, I had 2 new messages waiting for me. One from my wife, one from my dad. Both long, carefully worded, talking about forgiveness, maturity, second chances. They still believe there was a version of this that worked for all of us. That was the moment it hit me. They weren't just hoping I'd go along with it. They expected me to. They thought I'd be so afraid of losing my family or causing drama that I'd just stay quiet, suck it up, and nod my head like a good little doormat. I stared at those messages until 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I opened a blank reply and wrote exactly one sentence. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Update 2 asterisk after that night. I didn't open another message from either of them. I didn't block them, though. My lawyer said it was smart to keep a full record, just in case. I was starting to think smarter myself. In the quiet moments, I kept waiting for the shock to wear off. Some part of me thought I'd wake up and feel numb, detached, like this was someone else's nightmare. But instead, it just stayed sharp. Every single day felt like trying to hold my breath underwater, while pretending nothing had changed. The worst part was pretending in front of other people. I hadn't told my mom yet. She and my dad had divorced over a decade ago. She was finally happy in her own life. The last thing I wanted was to drag her back into his mess. But the longer I stayed silent, the more it ate away at me. It all came to a head at a family dinner 2 weeks later. It was one of those informal Sunday potlucks my aunt hosted. Half the family catching up, kids yelling. I almost skipped it, but then I thought, asterisk, why should I stay away? I haven't done anything wrong. Asterisk, I showed up with a store-bought pie because I had zero energy to cook. The moment I walked in, I could feel the shift. A couple of my cousins looked at me a little too long. My aunt offered me a glass of wine, not quite meeting my eyes. And then I saw my dad. He was already there, and sitting right next to him, she was there, too. My wife, laughing with someone, acting like she belonged there. I nearly turned around and walked out. But something in me just snapped. If this was the game they were playing, this public rollout, like nothing had happened, I wasn't going to just fade into the background and let them own the narrative. I walked straight up to the table, pulled up a chair across from them, and said, I'm surprised to see both of you here. My dad smiled like we were catching up over coffee. He said he figured it was time to be honest with the family, that transparency would help everyone move on. My wife just sat there, stiff, like she'd rehearsed for this moment, and wasn't quite sure if she should speak. So, I did it for them. I stood up, looked around the entire table, and told everyone. I caught them cheating. I said my dad and my wife had been together behind my back for who knows how long. I said they had proposed a deal to me, a deal where I would stay legally married and just let them carry on, while I played dumb, all to keep the family at peace. Silence. Dead silence. My aunt looked horrified. My cousin's jaw dropped. My mom wasn't there that night, thankfully. I don't think I could have handled her reaction. My dad tried to jump in, sputtering that I was twisting things, that he and my wife had reconnected emotionally and hadn't meant to hurt me, but that adults should be able to handle mature relationships. I cut him off. What kind of mature relationship? I asked him, my voice trembling with rage. Involves sneaking around and sleeping with your son's wife. That's when the room started moving again. A few people got up. One of my uncles asked my wife if it was true. She just nodded, mumbled something about how things got complicated. Complicated. That was the word she used for blowing up 2 relationships and turning a family upside down. I left after that. I'd said what I needed to. I didn't wait to see who stayed at the table with them or who walked away. I figured people would make up their own minds, and I wasn't going to beg for sides. The fallout came in waves. Some relatives called and texted me later that night, saying they couldn't believe it. A few apologized for not seeing it sooner. Others stayed suspiciously quiet, probably trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. My dad sent me another long message the next morning, saying I'd handled things poorly and shamed the family with my dramatic outburst. That actually made me laugh out loud. Shamed the family, as if what I exposed was worse than what they'd done. My wife, for her part, sent a shorter message. She said she was sorry that things had to be this way, and hoped one day I'd understand how hard it had been for her to choose between 2 people she loved. I didn't respond. I gave my lawyer the go-ahead to start the divorce paperwork. He warned me it might get messy since we hadn't been married that long and didn't have a prenup. I told him I didn't care about the furniture or the bank account or any of it. I just wanted my name off the papers. I wanted my life back. That weekend, I took a long drive out to the coast. I needed air that didn't feel tainted. I walked along the water until the sun went down, thinking about how I'd been manipulated into believing that peace was worth sacrificing myself for. But peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth. And if telling the truth makes me the villain in their story, then so be it. They weren't heroes to begin with. Update 3 asterisk in the week after that dinner, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Some messages were short, just people saying they were shocked or sorry. A few came from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly interested in offering me their version of support. But most of the family stayed silent. And the ones who weren't silent, well, they had opinions. My uncle, my father's brother, one of the more vocal ones, sent me a wall of texts saying I should have kept things private. He said everyone had secrets, and airing dirty laundry at a family gathering was immature. He ended it by saying he didn't want to choose sides, but I'd forced his hand. I didn't bother replying. Let him have his neutrality. I wasn't looking for a crowd behind me. I just wasn't going to play along with the idea that silence somehow equated to maturity. What really gutted me, though, was hearing from my mom. She called me after one of my cousins filled her in. She said she wished I had told her directly instead of hearing it through them. But she also said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd lived with that version of my dad for decades, and had spent years convincing herself she was the crazy one. She didn't ask for details. She just said she loved me, and that I needed to take care of myself. That call helped me more than I realized in the moment. Meanwhile, my soon-to-be ex-wife and my dad had gone full steam ahead with whatever fantasy world they were trying to build. They even posted a photo together at some family-friendly outdoor event. The caption talked about new beginnings and forgiveness. It was nauseating, like watching people decorate a house that was built on a graveyard. I knew they were trying to control the narrative, make it look like they were the strong ones, overcoming adversity together. I didn't engage, but I also wasn't going to let them rewrite what happened. When the divorce papers were finally served to her, she tried calling. I didn't pick up. Then she messaged, saying she hoped we could talk things through and maybe pause the proceedings until emotions cooled down. I forwarded it to my lawyer and told him to proceed. I'd lived for months under a roof where she'd pretended to be someone else. Someone who laughed at my jokes, who kissed me goodnight, who called me her husband while probably texting my father behind my back. That kind of betrayal doesn't cool down. It just burns through whatever pieces of you are still soft. She kept trying. There were more messages, a couple of long ones explaining how she never meant to hurt me, and that she was confused for a long time. But she finally followed her heart. She said she knew this was hard for me, but she hoped one day I could forgive her. That was the moment I realized just how deeply she didn't get it. She thought this was a love triangle, some sad, emotional misstep that could be chalked up to timing or chemistry or fate. She didn't see the absolute wreckage left behind. Not just the broken trust, but the power dynamics, the manipulation, the way they tried to corner me into accepting their fantasy so that they wouldn't have to carry the guilt. It wasn't a love story. It was a betrayal, soaked in arrogance. Around that time, my dad tried again too. He left a voicemail saying he still wanted to find a way forward. He said that, no matter what happened, we were still blood, and he refused to let this tear us apart permanently. I ignored the message without listening to the end. Let me be clear, this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't looking to destroy their lives or expose them just for sport. I just wanted to stop pretending. I wanted to reclaim my space in the family without having to plaster on a smile while sitting across the table from two people who had thrown me under the bus and then acted like I should thank them for it. And yet, even after everything, part of me kept waiting for the guilt to show up. I thought maybe I'd feel bad about how public it all got, about how my decision to speak up created all these ripples. But guilt never came, not in the way I expected. What had come were moments of peace. I'd wake up and realize I didn't have to second-guess the way my wife looked at her phone. I didn't have to wonder why my dad acted so overinvested in my marriage. I didn't have to carry the weight of trying to please everyone while breaking my own back. One afternoon, I sat outside a coffee shop with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. He asked how I was doing, genuinely, not the small talk kind of check-in. I told him the truth, that some days were ugly and quiet and lonely, but that every day also felt a little more mine. He said that sounded like healing. I think he was right. But the thing about healing is that it's not always graceful. Sometimes it looks like blocking numbers. Sometimes it sounds like screaming into a pillow. Sometimes it means deleting every photo and starting over. And sometimes, more often than we admit, healing means letting people think you're bitter, just so you can finally be free. Update 4 asterisk, I honestly thought the worst of it was behind me. I'm staying opposite Lucas's place now. His neighbor wanted to rent out their house, so it worked out perfectly. I came home from work, and there it was, a letter taped to my front door. Not mailed, not slid under, but taped, like a threat pretending to be an invitation. It was from my father. He wrote that he didn't expect me to forgive him overnight, but he hoped we could talk like adults. He said he and my ex-wife were considering a future together and wanted to do it with my blessing. He wrote that they would never truly be happy if they knew I was out there still hurting, that they needed peace in the family. The sheer arrogance in that letter made my skin crawl. He still saw himself as the peacemaker, even after what he did. Still imagined this whole thing as some tragic misunderstanding that needed to be hugged into submission. It made me realize something chilling. He didn't feel guilty. He felt inconvenienced. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was just tired of me refusing to get over it. I didn't respond. I threw the letter in the trash. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What kind of man cheats with his son's wife, before the wedding, during the marriage, and after the split, and then has the audacity to ask for a blessing, like this was a church ceremony and not a crime scene? The anger started creeping back in, slowly but surely. I'd been so focused on cutting ties, on moving on, that I hadn't even allowed myself to process just how twisted all of it was. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the unbelievable nerve it took for both of them to sit me down and suggest that we all work it out for the sake of the family. They didn't want healing. They wanted silence. It took another week before I got another message, this time from my cousin Julie. She said she'd run into my dad and his new girlfriend at a restaurant downtown. She said they were laughing, holding hands, acting like a newlywed couple. My dad had introduced her by saying they were just thankful everything worked out in the end. Worked out. I read those words 5 times before I could even move. That was when something inside me cracked. I couldn't let them go around acting like this was some happy accident. I wasn't going to write a memoir or start a Facebook post war, but I couldn't just let the narrative be whatever they wanted. So, I started putting together everything I had. Messages, dates, photos, that awful letter he wrote. I had actually pulled it out of the trash later. My lawyer told me to save everything. I was making a paper trail. Something that, if ever questioned, could back up the truth. Not because I wanted to ruin them, but because I needed to know that if one more person ever asked me, "Well, are you sure it happened like that?" I could say yes. Yes, I'm sure. And here's why. It was around that time that a mutual friend, a guy I hadn't heard from since the wedding, reached out to grab coffee. I hesitated, but said yes. I think I just wanted to hear someone say something normal for once, something that didn't involve betrayal or second chances or peace in the family. He asked how I'd been, and I told him the short version. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said he'd known something was off the day of the wedding. He saw my dad give her a look. Not a protective look. Not even a proud look. Something possessive. He said it gave him chills. But what do you say at a wedding? You just convince yourself you imagined it. I didn't know whether to feel validated or sick. We sat in silence for a bit after that. Then he said if I ever needed anything, a place to crash, a weekend getaway, someone to play cards with, he was there. I thanked him, and I meant it. Still, by the time I got home that night, the weight of everything just came crashing down. You don't think betrayal is going to break you until it does. You imagine yourself rising above it, walking away with your head high, becoming the bigger person. But sometimes, being the bigger person feels like being the loneliest one in the room. I lay in bed, thinking about all the memories I couldn't unsee. Family dinners, birthday parties, movie nights on the couch. All the moments they probably shared long before I caught on. All the smiles that now felt rotten from the inside out. And the worst part? I still hadn't even told some people why we split. I was so used to protecting everyone else from discomfort that I forgot to protect myself from the burden of carrying all the truth alone. But not anymore. The next morning, I drafted a letter. Not public, just for close family and friends who deserve to know what really happened. I told them the truth. Not the embellished version, not the dramatized one, just the truth. I said I wasn't asking anyone to pick sides, but I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I said I had nothing to hide, and that I hoped moving forward, people would stop asking why I seemed so distant lately. I didn't sign it bitterly or go on a rant. I just told the truth, and I hit send. Update 5 asterisk. It had been 3 months since I sent out that letter, explaining everything. 3 months of silence from my father. 3 months of radio static from her. 3 months of quiet shifts in my circle, as friends, family, and acquaintances rearranged themselves based on what they now knew. Some reached out with disbelief. Some apologized for not noticing. And some disappeared altogether, uncomfortable with the truth now sitting plainly in front of them. Honestly, I didn't miss any of them. What I did miss was my home. Not the place I was renting now, though it served its purpose, but the house. The one I bought 5 years ago. The one I had spent my weekends on, one project at a time. The one with the garden I planted, the patio I built, and the walls I painted with her back, when I still thought love meant something permanent. When I left after that night, the night they sat me down like it was some family meeting and not a complete, soul-crushing betrayal, I hadn't even packed a full bag. I just walked out, not trusting myself to stay calm if I spent one more minute inside that space we once called ours. I figured I'd come back for the rest once the dust settled. But then it hit me. It was my house. Bought under my name, with my money, my down payment, my everything. The only reason she was still staying there comfortably was because I hadn't reclaimed the property. I had been too stunned, too heartbroken, too busy surviving to fight for it. But not anymore. I called my lawyer the next day and asked what it would take to secure the house. He asked if I had any documents proving it was mine. I told him the house was bought before the marriage. I had the mortgage, the title, everything solely in my name. When we got married, she had insisted on adding her name to the mailbox, not the deed, and I didn't think much of it. It felt like a small thing at the time. He told me, with a tone I hadn't heard from him before, that it was going to be a very clean case. She tried to stall, of course. Sent her lawyer back with questions, claimed emotional distress, said she had grown attached to the home and felt entitled to half its value. My lawyer shut it down quickly. There was no gray area, no shared ownership, nothing in her name, no payments made from her account. I was more generous than I needed to be, offering her 30 days to pack up and leave. Not because I owed her anything, but because I didn't want her making a scene or trashing the place out of spite. I told her, through her lawyer, that if anything in the house was missing or damaged, I'd pursue it legally. She didn't reply after that. Update 6 asterisk. The divorce took 6 months in total. Honestly, it was the most peaceful part of this whole mess. And when I finally held those papers in my hands, stamped, sealed, official, I just sat there in my car, in the driveway of my house, and stared at it. 2 years of lies, undone in 12 pages. I stepped inside that house for the first time since the day everything fell apart. And it was eerie at first, like walking into a memory that didn't know it had died. Her things were gone, but her scent lingered faintly in the air. There was an emptiness to the space now, but I welcomed it. It meant I could finally fill it with something real. A week later, I started repainting the walls. Not because they needed it, but because I did. Every stroke felt like closing a door. Every coat of paint felt like setting fire to old, fake happiness. I sold the couch, got a new rug, replaced the curtains she liked with ones I actually wanted. It was slow, but it was mine. I still hadn't spoken to my father or her, and I didn't plan to. I heard from Julie, my cousin, that they weren't together anymore. Apparently, she didn't like the way he treated her once they were official. Apparently, the guilt he never showed to me found its way to her eventually. I didn't care, because even after everything, even after having my world ripped apart, I was still standing. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly free.